Okay, everyone. So let us carry on. This is one of Ajahn Brahm's famous sayings. Ajahn Brahm he walks around the monastery. Actually, he doesn't walk around the monastery anymore, but he used to walk around the monastery. These days, he just walks between the Dharmasala and his kuti. That's all he does. But he used to walk around, and when he walked around, he would look at all the monks, he would see what they're doing, and he would have a look, and he would say, "Very good, carry on." That's all he would ever. That's what he would say. So we're going to carry on. We're going to follow Ajahn Brahm's footsteps. Okay, we're going to look at the Ogatarana Sutta very briefly, just to set the scene and to get an idea of what right view is, and in a sense, why it matters so enormously on this path. And so what I normally do on these kind of retreats is to read the sutta, and then I will comment on it afterwards. So always remember that when I read the sutta, what the most important thing is the sutta, not my commentary here. Yeah, my commentary might be completely off. The sutta is what matters. But it is kind of the job of a teacher or a monastic to comment and to make it understandable, but at the end of the day, it is the sutta that is important. And I think one of the problems of Buddhist history here is that we have tendency to take the commentary as more important than the sutta. That is why we sometimes go astray here, and that is why we have a problem. But if we take the sutta as primary and the commentary as secondary, then we understand things in the right way here. So let's see what this sutta has to say. So this is in Bhante Suddhato's translation. So let's see how he translates this. No, this is actually Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. Sorry. No, what is this? It's a mixture, maybe. I don't know what it is. I think it's Bhante Suddhato's translation with my changes to his translation. I think that's what it is. It's a kind of a hybrid translation here. So here we go. So I have heard. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery here. Then, late at night, a glorious deity, lighting up the entire Jeta's Grove, went up to the Buddha, bowed, stood to one side, and said to him, "Good sir, how did you cross the flood?" Yeah, so this is the starting point here. And of course, we have the typical beginning of all suttas. So I have heard. This is an oral transmission from one generation of monastics to the next generation. That's why it is so I have heard. The Buddha is staying in Savatthi in Jeta's Grove. And for those of you who have been to India, you probably have visited Savatthi as well. And you've been to Jeta's Grove. It's actually quite a nice place in India right now because it's in the sticks of India. There's no people there. It's very peaceful, far away from... actually, it used to be nice and peaceful, but now there are so many Buddhist pilgrims. Actually, it's quite noisy. You think that Buddhists were good at being quiet, but when they travel on pilgrimage in India, they're not very good at being quiet. So sometimes you have to kind of be strategic and go to this place at the right time. So go early in the morning, before the noisy pilgrims come, and you can be the quiet pilgrim, and then you can sit, down in these beautiful places, and you can experience some of the atmosphere, probably the way it was at the time of the Buddha. So you have to be strategic. Go to the Vulture Peak early in the morning in Rajagaha, sitting in the place where the Buddha sat, right? One of the extraordinary things about going to India, and I have to admit, for me, India is this fairy tale land because it's so different from what I'm used to. And I find India, on one hand, is a very infuriating place to be, but it's also really charming in so many ways. And then when you go to these places in India, and you go to a place like Rajagaha, the king's hold, or the king's fortress, also known as Giribhaja, you go there, and then you read the suttas about what it's supposed to look like. It has the 7 mountains around, and then it has the kind of hot springs there. It has the Vulture's Peak, you have the Boar's Cave, and then you go there, and it's exactly like the suttas say. So it's a bit like entering the suttas. Because one of the problems with the suttas is that they can very easily seem a bit like a fairy tale. yeah, something ancient that has been passed down to us to 2,500 years, it's hard to know whether these things are real or whether they are stories. So when you go to India and you actually see that this is the reality, yeah, the hot springs at the foot of the Vibhara hill is the same, still there today. People are still bathing in those same hot springs 2,500 years later. The Buddha said, things are impermanent, some things are less impermanent than others. Yeah. And so you kind of enter, you enter this realm of the Buddha, and it's like you are there and you feel that you're walking in the footsteps of the Buddha. This can happen also in Savatthi. When you go to Savatthi, you go to the Jeta Grove, even in the present day, you can see the kind of the mounds that were the ramparts of the ancient city of Savatthi. Ramparts like these big mounds that kind of delimited the city, if you like, of Savatthi. It is still there in the Jeta Grove, then being 500 meters, maybe a kilometer away. And it's very, very interesting to do this. So I would really recommend those of you who haven't been to India, if you have an opportunity, just at least once in a lifetime, it's a good thing to do. And of course, the Buddha recommended that. Yeah, he said this is one of the things that we should do to get inspired, going to the 4 holy places. And then by going to the 4 holy places outside, where the Buddha was born, where he reached his awakening, where he taught the first sermon, and where he passed away, by going to those 4 places outside, then that helps you to go to the 4 holy places inside. Yeah, which of course are the deep meditations that we go inside afterwards. So all of these things kind of work together. So Anathapindika's monastery, there's a long story of Anathapindika, I won't get into that now, but it is all there in the Vinaya Pitaka. And then the deities come down, right? The deities come down, lighting up the entire Jeta's Grove. They bow down to the Buddha, stand down to one side, and then they say, how did you cross the flood? How did you overcome all of these problems? How did you reach the other shore, the other side of this great flood? And this is kind of nice, when the deities come and they understand that the Buddha is the one who is awakened. How would you react if you saw a deity here? If this amazing being, full of light, full of glory, comes down to you and says, I am a deity here. How would you react? Right? The way most people react, they say, oh, God has come to me, please, and they start worshipping God, right? That's what happens to most people. And you hear about this, sometimes people have near-death experiences, and when they have near-death experiences, often they will meet with these deities, and they say, I saw God. That's what they will say. This is a natural reaction. But in Buddhism, it's the other way around. It's not the deities that are worthy of worship. In fact, the deities worship the Buddha. The Buddha is the one who has the wisdom and the insight. So we are often, as human beings, we are often led astray by appearances, because the appearance is so beautiful, the appearance is so powerful. We take that to be the essence. But of course, the essence is not the appearance. The essence is what is inside. It's the wisdom, it's the understanding. So the Buddha, in Buddhism, we kind of invert the universe a little bit. The Buddha is on top, and the gods kind of come underneath. And then it kind of goes down like that. So that's it's kind of an interesting thing. So if you ever see God, maybe it's not what you think it is. So, so how did you cross the flood? The deity wants to know. And then he has this beautiful answer. Neither halting nor straining, sir, I crossed the flood. A little bit strange that the Buddha calls the deity sir, but anyway, this is Bhante Sujato's translation. I take no responsibility for this. It's good to have an excuse, isn't it? So, and this is a interesting saying, right? Neither halting nor straining, sir, or friend, really, avuso, friend is the usual translation, I crossed the flood. And this is almost like a koan in a sense. Often you wonder where some of these Buddhist developments come from. These koans, of course, Zen Buddhism is very famous for the koans. And this is a bit like a koan. It's a bit like mysterious. neither halting nor straining, yeah, neither halting nor moving forward. What exactly is going on here? What else is there? Either you halt or you move, right? What is the middle way here? This doesn't make any sense on first appearances. It's like the sound of one hand clapping or something like that. This is a bit like that. And it's fascinating because there are a few suttas like that that are a little bit mysterious, that are a little bit strange. And I wonder whether maybe this is the background or the root cause for the koans in Buddhism, right? That actually the Buddha did have some of these mysterious things. And of course, the beauty of these slightly mysterious things, it forces us to go deeper. It forces us to ask, well, what actually is going on here? Yeah, is this just a paradox? Or is there something more than just a paradox? And of course, if it is a teaching of the Buddha, there's something more than a paradox going on. So how is this possible? What's going on here? So let's see what happens next. But in what way did you cross the flood, neither halting nor straining? When I stood still, I went under her. But when I strained, I was swept away. That is how I crossed the flood, neither halting nor straining her. So, what's going on here? What is the idea of halting and going under her? And I think the idea of halting here means no longer really taking an interest in the spiritual path, no longer inclining your mind towards the spiritual teachings. And the moment you halt in that way and you forget about what is important in life, you kind of sink down. Sinking down here means like drowning in the current of samsara, getting your head underwater and no longer being able to breathe. And there's no longer any path forward. Eventually you get swept away by the stream itself. And then, of course, you have a very serious problem as a consequence. So this is when we halt, when we no longer take an interest in these teachings, and we forget about what is important in life. What about straining? Straining is what everyone in the world does. The idea of being driven by craving, pushed by craving in this world, always trying to find something by being driven by this force inside of us, using the willpower to exert ourselves to get something in our life. This is kind of the standard way of humanity. But if we use craving too much, and if we use the willpower too much, then basically that is the same thing as what everyone else does in society, and then we get swept along by this flood of craving, driven on to rebirth, because sankhara, paccaya vijnana, sankharas, the will, all of these things are the cause for vijnana or rebirth in the future. And we actually carry on this existence because it's almost as if we are rejoicing in the idea of our ability to act, our ability to will in the world, and that will acting, that enjoyment of that, and drives the kind of the rebirth process further, and we get swept along with the stream, as it says quite rightly here, quite rightly I shouldn't say, as it says here. And so what is the alternative? If we don't strive, if we don't use willpower, and we're not supposed to halt. And the alternative is here, the idea of wisdom power, the idea of right view. And this is why this here is at the beginning of what the Buddha to be is about, what the idea of right view is about, and why we're going to discuss right view in such great detail. It starts with this. This is the beginning point. Right view, seeing the world in the right way, investigating this teaching, gaining that wisdom that makes the path move by itself. One of the weird things about, when you really have purified your view, like the stream mentor has, the stream mentor doesn't really strive anymore. Doesn't need to strive. Even if they do nothing, they will reach awakening in 7 lifetimes. This is what the sotapanna is all about. And so the moment you have right view, the path just works by itself. And so for us, we want to try to emulate that to some extent. The more right view you have, the path starts to work by itself. So what does that mean? Well, it means that because you understand, for example, the importance of sila or virtue, you become naturally virtuous. You don't have to think, should I do the right thing or the wrong thing? Of course you're going to do the right thing, And One way of thinking about the idea of sila in this context, which I think is quite a nice way of thinking about it. If you go down to the main road, wherever it is over here, and you are about to cross the road, are you going to look left and right, or are you just going to walk straight into the road? What is your method of crossing the road? Most people, if they have a little bit of wisdom, that doesn't take much wisdom, tiny bit of wisdom, they look, what is it? Which way first? Now I can't remember now. There's so many. I get so confused. You look one way first and the other way afterwards, right? Depending on where the cars come from. So, if you just walk straight into the street, that's considered madness. It's considered suicide attempt. Yeah, if you do that, we all look before we cross the street. But do you look every time before you speak? Do you look left and right every time before you act? Do you look left and right every time before you think a thought? Far more dangerous to you, and to your future well-being, to your path to awakening, far more dangerous is how you act, how you speak, and how you think, than whether you cross the street in the right way or the wrong way. If you cross the street, the worst thing that can happen is that you die. Big deal, right? Die, okay, you get reborn, you carry on, whatever. It's not such a big deal. If you think the wrong thought, that has really, really bad consequences in the long run. And this is kind of the idea of right view, is that you understand what matters in the world. We get things the wrong way around. We're concerned about living and dying, but living and dying is not the problem. We're going to have to die anyway, whether you die tomorrow or in 1 year or in 10 years. That's kind of irrelevant. What matters is how we live our lives. That is what is important. Okay, I don't mean you should die straight away. Please don't die straight away. That's not my point. My point is that we often get things wrong. What really is important? And if you understand the importance of sila, if you have this right view, you will never think a thought without first looking left, first looking right. What should I really be saying in this case? What is the right act? How should I think in this case? That is the profundity. That is the importance of sila on the Buddhist path. And how does that come about? It comes about through right view. Yeah? This is the wisdom power. This is the power of wisdom. This is the power of understanding. And that is why once you become a Buddha, in fact, even once you become a stream enterer, you become perfect in sila, silang paripuri kari. It says in the Anguttara Nikaya 3, Suttas 89 or something like that. You become perfect in sila. Why? Because you understand how important this is. You always look right and left before you do anything. That's how important it is. So this is the idea of wisdom power. Often we think of wisdom power as something watching the arising and passing away, arising and passing away of mental phenomena. And that's all kind of nice. But you're never going to be able to watch that arising and passing away without really purifying your sila, first of all. We get the simple things wrong, and then we go straight to the complicated things. The simple things are what really matters on this path. They sound simple, but actually they're not that simple after all. So this is the idea of wisdom. This is how the Noble Eightfold Path unfolds as a consequence of right view. This is the real power of right view. I also talked about generosity last night. Generosity also unfolds as a consequence of right view. We understand the power of generosity here. We understand how generosity is, in fact, similar in some respects to the awakening experience itself, because you're giving up something of yourself. That is exactly what awakening is about. Every time you're generous, you're experiencing a small, tiny awakening here. How does it feel? It feels good, right? If you're really giving from your heart, it feels beautiful. If that is what awakening is about, please, let me have some more of it. That's the idea here. So this is what the Buddha is saying. Right view is driving you. You don't need to strive, nor do you halt, because right view is actually making you do the right thing. It comes automatically. Then when you sit down, because you are very pure, you are acting in the right way, thinking in the right way, speaking in the right way, you close your eyes, you feel so much goodness in your heart, you feel happy about your life, you feel happy about other people, meditation just happens. This is the ideal way of meditating. Meditation just happens. You don't have to do anything about it. You become peaceful. The willpower gets taken out of the way, And then the whole thing actually unfolds as a matter of course. This is what the Buddha says in certain suttas. There's a beautiful sutta called the Chaitanya Sutta that I talk about every time I teach a retreat. In that sutta, the Buddha says, you do not need to make an intention. You do not need any will. In fact, he doesn't say you don't need any will. He says much more than that. This is the translation by both Bhikkhu Bodhi and Bhante Sujato. You do not need. They're both wrong. I'm quite arrogant, so I just have to warn you. I'm an arrogant person. They are getting it roughly right, but it doesn't say that. It says na chetanaya karaniya, which means this is not to be done by an act of will. It cannot be done by an act of will, which is much stronger, that you don't need an act of will, right? And I was really disappointed when Bhante Sujato followed in the footsteps of Bhikkhu Bodhi here. And I wanted to tell him off, but it's very difficult to tell him off, so I kind of, okay, let it be. It's okay, good enough. I will... I'm just messing around a bit. Bhante Sujato is a very, very good friend of mine, so it's not an issue. But, one of the things about the Dhamma is to discuss it and then kind of move forward on that basis. So the willpower gets in the way. Why? Because it's Dhammata. Dhammata means in Buddhism according to nature. So the evolving of the process of meditation, the mind becoming more peaceful, the mind becoming still, the mind experiencing bliss, is a natural consequence once the foundation is in place. Once you have right view, it just happens. Once you have access to joy, it happens by itself. That is the ideal way of meditating here. So this is what this means, It's very profound and very beautiful. Just allow the process to happen. You don't halt, because the process is automatic. And then the Devata says, this God says, after a long time I see a Brahmin extinguished, neither halting nor straining, he's crossed over, clinging to the world. So the Devata is happy here, understands what's going on. The wise Deva. The Devas are not always wise, but this is a wise one. This is what that deity said, and the teacher approved. Then that deity, knowing that the teacher had approved, bowed, respectfully circled the Buddha, keeping him on the right before vanishing right there. All right, that's crossing the flood for you. It's setting the scene, and it shows us the importance of right view. So now we're going to focus more on the right view in the next sutta. The next sutta is known as the Arya Paryesana Sutta. Paryesana means search. Arya means noble. It means the noble search. And this is a sutta where the Buddha talks about his own pre-awakening practices and his experiences. So now we're going to look at how the Buddha reached awakening here. And one of the kind of extraordinary things to my mind when I read the story of the Buddha is how simple it is, how it is not very difficult to understand, and how the very basic realities of life is what the Buddha reflects on. And those very simple realities of life is what enables the Buddha to become awakened. The difference between the Buddha and us is not that the Buddha thought about things in a very difficult or complex way. No, the difference is the profundity of the Buddha, the depth to which he is reflecting on these things. So all that we have to do is to reflect on these very simple things in a deeper way. And as we do that, we're going to be moving in the same way here. So this is the Arya Paryesana Sutta. So we'll just dive straight into it. So this is an extract, so it begins kind of in the middle of the sutta. And so that's why it is a bit funny. It starts off by saying, good mendicants, because this is the Buddha arriving on the scene. He's going to give a Dhamma talk to a large group of monks. They have met together in a place called, whose hermitage is it again? What's the name of this person? Ramaka's hermitage, I think it is. And they have met together, and they're all kind of waiting for the Buddha to arrive, and then the Buddha arrives. And one of the kind of some of the little details that you see in some of these narratives where they talk about the way the Buddha comes are actually very interesting. Yeah, the Buddha arrives. And the way the Buddha arrives, sometimes we think of the Buddha in entirely the wrong way. But if you read these little things about the Buddha, it gives you a sense of who he actually was. So the Buddha arrives at Ramaka's hermitage, and when he arrives, what does he do? Do you think he just opens the door and kind of, because he's very important, right? So maybe he just opens the door and says, yeah, I have arrived. Okay, listen, this is a Dhamma talk for you. No. That is not what the Buddha does, yeah? And this is kind of fascinating. What the Buddha does, he hears that the monks are having a discussion inside. I haven't actually included this here because, I don't know, I just left it out. But he stands outside the hall. He hears the monks talking, having a discussion inside. He doesn't just go in. He waits till the discussion is over. Yeah, he listens to the door, okay, they're still discussing. He waits outside. That's kind of extraordinary, isn't it? This is the Buddha. Yeah, I'm sure, surely everyone wants to see the Buddha. Why doesn't he walk straight in? Because he is a human being. Because he is polite. Yeah, he knows he does things in the right way. He doesn't just burst into the things, even though it is the teacher of everyone. And so you can see here how the Buddha lives just like an ordinary person in society, living up to the standard that's required of someone who is well educated in that society, because obviously he was well educated. Yeah, and then after waiting till the conversation is over, he knocks on the door. He doesn't just walk in, he knocks on the door, right? Again, an expression of being polite. You just don't burst into the hall. Then they come and they open a door for him. Yeah, and then he walks inside, and then he asks them, what were you discussing here today? It's kind of beautiful, and you can see how the Buddha is very much an ordinary human being among other human beings, while at the same time having the extraordinary wisdom of a Buddha. So this is kind of the two things that we need to have in mind at the same time, that the Buddha in many ways is just like an ordinary human, but of course he also has the wisdom that kind of makes him transcend the human condition. And then the monks tell him, actually, well, we were just discussing about you, Venerable Sir, yeah, discussing about the Buddha. And then the Buddha says, good mendicants. And then he says, it is appropriate for gentlemen like you. This is another Bhante Sujato translation, gentlemen. This is Kulaputta. Who have gone forth in faith from the lay life to homelessness to sit together and talk about the teaching. When you're sitting together, you should do one of two things. Discuss the teaching or keep noble silence. No point in too much chit-chat. We just discuss teaching or noble silence. I heard there was a bit of chit-chat going on while I was walking back and forth here, so I hope that was all about the teachings. Okay, I'm being naughty, yeah, so I apologize. The reason I'm naughty because I'm a disciple of Ajahn Brahm. Ajahn Brahm is also very naughty, so I'm just following in his footsteps, and that's all. Just brainwashed, that's the reason. So this is a beautiful idea, right? It's kind of, we try to have meaningful speech, teachings, or we keep noble silence. This is kind of the ideal kind of in Buddhism. It's a very high ideal to reach, and it's not really expected that we should reach that ideal, except maybe if you are a well-practicing monastic, but it's like something to think about anyway. So, so that is kind of the background here. And then the Buddha says, mendicants, there are these two searches, the noble search and the ignoble search. So there's two searches in the world, the noble search and the ignoble search. In other words, one search that is really worthwhile, one search that leads you, gets you somewhere, one search that leads to happiness and meaning, and one search which is ignoble. So what is the search of most people in the world? I've got bad news for you. Most people are on the ignoble search, right? And sometimes you look at monastics, and even the majority of monastics are sometimes onto the ignoble search. And sometimes you find a few lay people who are on the noble search. So it is not, I'm not trying here to make an absolute distinction between monastics and lay people. You have to look at the individual conduct. But basically, the search, the Buddha sets the bar very high. Yeah, it's a very, very high bar to clear. So ignoble search is what most people are doing with their lives. And most of us, we're kind of a little bit in between. We're doing ignoble search and a little bit of noble search as well. The reason why we're here is because we're trying to do a noble search to the best of our abilities amid all the ignoble search. Yeah, so we're kind of mixing the two things a little bit together. And that's the way life has to be. So, but again, very interesting, because the idea of noble, is something that is beautiful, something that is pure, something that is elevated, something that is superior to ordinary human beings, the Aryas in the world. This is what the Aryas do. This is what the Buddha does. When we're doing this kind of search, actually, it is something really extraordinary and beautiful. So this does not mean that you are bad just because you're doing the ignoble search. It means that the noble search actually is something extraordinary special. And that is kind of, we are on the pathway of the Buddha, essentially, if we're going on, following the noble search. So there's always a danger if, we say that, we're following the ignoble search and we will put ourselves down and make ourselves feel bad. Please don't do that. That is the wrong way of understanding these teachings. Rather, you should think how extraordinary it is that you are here today and that you are partaking in something that actually is part of the noble search. That is what is extraordinary here. It is not bad that you're doing the ignoble search, but it is wonderful and marvelous that you actually have an inclination at all towards the noble search. Then you are thinking in the right way. Then you feel uplifted. Then you're actually doing something which leads the mind in the right direction. And then when you sit down to meditate, you feel good about yourself. Because actually, yes, I too, despite all the conditioning, despite all the difficulties in the world, despite all the pressure, all these things, still I'm doing something wonderful and marvelous. What a great thing that is. Then you're actually doing something which will head in the right way here. So noble search and ignoble search. So let's have a quick look at the meaning of the ignoble search. And of course, as I mentioned before, the Buddha to be, he also did the ignoble search before his awakening. So again, we are in very, very good company if we are following the ignoble search. So, so this is the meaning of the ignoble search. We get that out of the way, and we move on to the good parts afterwards. It is when someone who is themselves liable to be reborn seeks what is also liable to be reborn. They are themselves liable to grow old. They seek what is also liable to grow old. They are themselves liable to fall sick, and they seek what is also liable to sickness. They are themselves liable to die, and they seek what is also liable to death. They are themselves liable to sorrow, and they seek what is also liable to sorrow. They are themselves liable to become corrupted, and they seek what is also liable to be corrupted. This is the ignoble search. And this is what the Buddha to be did. And this is what the majority of the people in the world do. So this is kind of fascinating right away, because what this means is that we already have a problem. The problem is that there is suffering in life. This is like, if you like, just telling us that life has problems, right? You grow old, you become sick. How do you feel when you get sick? Are you happy, or is it miserable to be sick? I don't know about you, but I feel miserable when I'm sick. I feel, oh no, dukkha, sickness. It's kind of, the feeling is kind of, it's not nice to be sick. I actually have very good health. I don't really get sick very often. But so when I get sick, I think, well, this is utterly miserable. Really bad. Kind of lying on your bed and kind of, wow, dukkha. And then they're kind of waiting for people. Hopefully someone will come and look after me and help me out. And then no one comes, even more dukkha because of that. That's kind of that's life sometimes. So we need reflecting on these things in the right way, understanding these problems. Actually, it's really fundamental to understand that there are fundamental issues with life. And then, lo and behold, most people, there are these fundamental problems. We're going to die one day, right? One of the dying is actually, I don't know what you think about dying, but for most people, it's quite traumatic. Are you ready to die? Every one of you? If you're going to die in 5 minutes, are you okay with that? Most people are not okay with that, right? If I say, you're going to die in 5 minutes, oh yeah, that's fine, no worries, I'm going to die in 5 minutes. But usually not okay, and the reason why we're not okay is because we have invested so much in this world. So much of our personality, so much of who we are is related to this world, in our families, in our status, in things that we have amassed during a long life. And because we have built up so much in this world, and because this world is important to us, it's difficult to let go. That is the problem of death, right? And we don't want to let go. And this again shows you that death actually is kind of scary because of that. And maybe I'll come back to this later on, talking a bit more about death and how to kind of think about death in the right way, so that we can let go a little bit more in this life. But there are fundamental issues. And then we go out into the world and we seek other things that have exactly the same problem. I already am going to die, and then I want to have a boyfriend or girlfriend, a husband and wife. They're also going to die, and I'm going to attach to them. And when I attach to them, I know that they are going to die. I know I'm going to grieve and suffer and sorrow when they pass away. I'm going to build up a fortune that I have to let go of. And I'm going to have a house which I'm going to get attached to. I'm going to have a status that I'm going to get attached to. And all of these things have to go. They're all going to have to pass away. Does this make any sense? What about children? Many of you probably have children. You probably love your children dearly. What happens when those children die? It's enormous suffering. I see people who have children. I don't have any children. Actually, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm quite happy with not having any children. But what is it like if your child dies? It is very, very traumatic for parents. It is much more difficult for a parent to see a child die than for a child seeing the parents pass away. They're very important to us, and yet we know that sometimes children die. We should not be surprised if a child dies. But are you ready for that? So we can see how we make the problem far worse. We already have a serious problem. And then we go out into the world and we build up more problems as a consequence. We hold on to, grasp onto all of these things, have the same problem that we already have. It's so simple, right? But yet so obvious. We are multiplying the problem. This is what this really is about. And it's kind of weird that it takes a Buddha to understand this, because actually staring us in the face. And yet, this takes a Buddha to understand a simple reality like this. Isn't that kind of extraordinary? How come we don't understand these things? And one reason we don't understand it is because we don't think there is an alternative. That's one of the reasons, right? This is the only alternative, especially before the Buddha arises. This is what the world is like. And this is kind of one of the amazing things about the Buddha. The Buddha says, okay, there are these problems. I'm just going to walk off into the forest. I'm going to find a solution to death. If anyone does that in Australia, and they say, all right, I'm fed up with living in Sydney, too much dukkha in Sydney. Is there much dukkha? I don't know much about Sydney, but I'm guessing it's just like any other city, or is Sydney somehow different? I don't think so. But if someone says, I'm just going to walk off into the forest and find a solution to death, you kind of write them off as a nutcase, right? But this is exactly what the Buddha does. And this is what kind of makes the Buddha so extraordinary, because even the simple realities of life, actually dealing with it seems kind of completely impossible. So this is what makes the Buddha so extraordinary. But actually the realities are very, very simple. And this is what the Buddha reflects on. And by reflecting on these little simple things, old age, death, illness, and what have you, this is what motivates the Buddha to go forth. This is the right view of the Bodhisattva before his awakening. This is what he does. He goes forth, and then, lo and behold, he finds the solution to old age, sickness, death, corruption, all of these things. So what does that mean for us? And what it means for us is if we want to follow in the Buddha's footsteps, some of the very simple things that we can do is to try to reflect on these things just in the same way as the Buddha reflected on these things. All you have to do is to reflect on old age. All you have to do is reflect on illness again and again and again. All you have to do is reflect on dying. But what you have to do, and this is the hard part, you have to do it again and again and again, gradually changing your view. There is a little book. Is there a book? Do we have that book? Yeah, there is a book, but I think at the back or something. And in that book, there is the simile of the supertanker. Yeah, I don't know, this is kind of one of the similes that I have used for a long time. And it is our minds are like supertankers. Yeah, we come into this world, and when we come into this world, we have this incredible momentum from the past. All our past lives, our habits, our delusions, all of these things. And because we come in with this enormous momentum from the past, the way of seeing the world that is deluded, and because the momentum is so strong, we are like supertankers. And the supertanker is one of the heaviest objects, man-made objects, or woman-made object, I'm not sure if, or whatever. And they weigh like 500,000 tons, and they still have speeds up to 20 knots. How long does it take to turn a supertanker around? It takes a long time because the momentum is so strong. But gradually, stage by stage, by using the rudder, using the propeller in the right way, slowly, the supertanker turns around. And eventually, that supertanker is going in the opposite direction from before. It takes a long time because the momentum is so strong. We are like that. We have tremendous momentum from the past. So if you want to look at the world in the right way, if you want to understand these teachings like the Buddha, we have to reflect on the simple ideas of dying, especially, again and again and again. And gradually, your mind is turning around. Gradually, you start to see things the way the Buddha saw this. But never underestimate the habits from the past. This is, I think, the biggest mistake we do in Buddhism, not understanding those habits. And slowly, this starts to bite, and you start to understand things in a different way, and the penny starts to drop what actually it means that you're going to die. I'm going to die here. No, I'm really going to die here. I don't know when I'm going to die. Am I ready to die now? What if I'm going to die now? What if I never will be leaving this room? What if these are the last words I hear in this life? Actually, it's a pretty good time to die, right? In the middle of listening to the teaching of the Buddha, if you're going to die, this is a good time. I recommend if you're going to die. No, I'm not. No, right? Sometimes we think about these things in the wrong. What's actually a good time to die? Well, a good time to die is when you are peaceful, at ease. You start to understand these teachings better. That's always a good time to die, because dying peacefully is one of the great benefits of how to end the life in a good way here. So gradually, by thinking about these things again and again, understanding what they mean, every morning when you wake up, remind yourself, I could die today. I met this man who he was also of a Sri Lankan background. He was a psychologist. I met him many years ago in Brisbane. And he told me this, that every morning when I leave the house, when I say goodbye to my wife for the day, I say goodbye to my kids and kind of take them to school or whatever, I remind myself I could die today. And that consequence of that was that every day he made sure that he left the house in a good way. He did it with a sense of metta and goodwill rather than after arguing or whatever. Simple little things that actually help you to kind of guide your mind in the right way. So this is the idea. This is what right view is about. It's a gradual development, gradual movement, until one day you start to see things the way the Buddha saw it. So let's see what the Buddha has to say about this in a bit more detail. So what should be described as liable to be reborn? Partners and children, male and female slaves, bond servants. I don't know if you understand the word bond servants. I don't really understand it, so I call it slaves instead. Goats and sheep, chickens and pigs, elephants and cattle are liable to be reborn. These attachments are liable to be reborn. Attachment here is upadhi, it's like belongings, yeah, or things that we think we own. We don't own them, but we think we own them. That's part of the problem. Someone who is tied, infatuated, and attached to such things, themselves liable to be reborn, seeks what is also liable to be reborn. Yeah, so these are kind of the things in ancient India that people would have. These days people don't have so many elephants and things, but in those days people had elephants and chickens and pigs and what have you, partners and children. Yeah, all of these things are reborn. All of them have this kind of problem. And upadhi, belongings, yeah, it implies attachment. That's kind of the idea of a belonging. And so if you are tied, infatuated, and attaching to such things, that is the definition of seeking what is liable to be reborn. Yeah, it is the attachment that is the problem. The ownership as such is not the problem. It is the attachment that is the problem. Yeah, being infatuated with these things, that is the issue, and that, of course, is what we're trying to overcome. The idea, the craving, and all of these kind of things on the Noble Eightfold Path. So this is kind of interesting. Yeah, the very first thing the Buddha talks about is the problem of being reborn. Why does the Buddha start with that? Why don't we start with something that is more easy to understand, like old age or death? Why does rebirth come at the beginning here? And one reason is that the Pali word is jati. Is it? Actually got the Pali next to it. That's really cool. So the Pali word is jati, right? Jati dhamma, the nature of being born. And jati means both birth and rebirth. And of course, the sequence here is that you get born, then you get old, you get ill, and then you die eventually. So it kind of follows a natural pattern. This is one reason why this is the case. But it's still interesting that the Buddha talks about rebirth, right? Or talks about birth in this particular case. Now, one of the interesting things here is the translation rebirth. Is that the right translation, or is birth the right translation? This is a good question. Jati, the word jati means both birth and also kind of rebirth. What is the right translation here? And I remember I was speaking to some academics. I was in England and I met a number of academics, and I was giving a little talk to these academics. I was talking about my translation activities of the Vinaya Pitaka, and that was actually very interesting to kind of give the monastic perspective on translation, which is often quite different from an academic perspective on translation. And I was kind of saying some of the things that I had been doing. And then I mentioned the idea of jati, and I said, well, some people translate jati as rebirth, and they were horrified. Jati does not mean rebirth. Jati means birth. This is wrong. We don't agree with this idea of rebirth. But actually, I think it is a very good idea to translate jati as rebirth. Because one of the things that we are trying to do when we translate the suttas, we're trying to ask ourselves, that audience in India who were listening to the Buddha, what did they hear when they heard the word jati? And what they would have heard, because every instance of jati is also an instance of rebirth. That was kind of the assumed, the underlying idea. But if we hear the word birth in a Western context, we never think about rebirth. It's just birth, got nothing to do with rebirth. So for us to get into that mindset of the ancient Indians, for us to understand things in the right way, actually it is appropriate to call it rebirth. In fact, you could argue that the next one should not be called old age, but re-old age. And re-death maybe, re-death. Because re-death sounds much worse than death. Re-death, what do you mean, re-death? It starts to sounds really scary when you hear the word re-death. And once there is one death or two deaths, re-death, there's bound to be many, many, many deaths, right? And kind of that one death is bad enough. What if you had all of these deaths before? So I think re-death is a nice translation, but anyway, this is maybe next time we translate the suttas. I don't know when that's going to be, but not in my lifetime. So this is kind of why rebirth makes sense in this context. Yeah, rebirth is not wrong. Yeah? So you have all of these animals are subject, all of these people are subject to being reborn. So why is rebirth such a bad thing? Very often when we think about rebirth, we think about it's a good thing. A lot of people in the world think, yeah, rebirth means that I learn the lessons in this life and then I continue learning lessons in my future life. Yeah, this is like seeing rebirth through rose-tinted glasses. We don't learn any lessons. That's the problem, right? That's why we're still here. If we had learned lessons in a past life, we'd be out of here a long time ago. The problem is we don't learn the lessons. Or sometimes we learn lessons and we forget them in our next life. This is the problem. We get a bit wiser, then we become more stupid again. Isn't that scary? That's kind of worrisome. Yeah, we think that we are on this trajectory here, that we're going to overcome these kind of things. We're going to learn the lessons and keep on learning. No, very often we don't learn. And because we don't learn, rebirth becomes kind of scary. We regress. What if there is no Buddhism next life? What it means is that sometimes we don't understand how lucky we are to be in a position where the Dhamma is here. We have the opportunity and we should not waste that opportunity. Rebirth is fundamentally scary. We don't know what's going to happen in our next life. We don't know if our habits are going to lead us astray. We're going to re-die. We're going to get re-old age. And if it happens once, rebirth is going to happen again. And on it goes. And when you get a little bit of a glimpse inside of that, it is utterly frightening and scary what this idea is about. So try to reflect on this. Don't just think that rebirth is a good idea because it means I can carry on. Understand what really is the underlying issues. And then kind of, okay, maybe this is not such a good idea. And then you start to move in a different direction. So rebirth here, in a sense, is like an overview. It's like the bird's eye view of all of these problems. It packs all the problems into one. Old age, death, yeah, and then multiplies it by 1 billion. That's what rebirth does. All the problems multiplied, massively, and then that is what actually comes out of this. So that is why I think rebirth stands at the beginning, and how it then becomes a kind of an overview of the whole problem of samsara. But it is a little bit difficult to understand, right? Rebirth is still a bit distant from us. It is something that we cannot access directly or understand directly. And for that reason, the Buddha then goes on to talk about the realities that are more accessible to us. Illness, old age, and death. And that is what we're going to talk about after the break. So now, please have a nice lunch together. And prepare some nice questions because after lunch, so we don't fall asleep, we're going to have a discussion about these issues after lunch. So please have a nice meal, and I will see you back again at, 12:30? What is it now? I forgot. 12:30. Okay, so we'll see you back in at 12:30.